Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor says it is investigating war crimes in Sudan's Darfur region and wants anyone with useful evidence to submit it to his office. The U.S. says it will provide additional humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians hours after Hamas accepted a UN ceasefire resolution. And the Royal Academy of Engineering celebrates its 10th anniversary in Nairobi, Kenya, with 4 finalists who developed scalable engineering solutions. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor Karim Khan on Tuesday called for evidence to assist his office as it investigates allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the city of Fashir in Sudan's Darfur region. Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori has more.
The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor is urgently investigating allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Sudan's Al-Fashir. The Darfur city has become a new front in the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. On Tuesday, Karim Khan called for anyone with possible evidence, including audio and visual material, to submit it to his office.
The evidence my office has collected to date seems to show credible, repeated, expanding, continuous allegations of attacks against the civilian population, in particular, attacks directed against camps for internally displaced persons. It seems to show the widespread, prevalent use of rape and other forms of sexual violence. It seems to disclose consistently the shelling of civilian areas, the looting of properties, and attacks against hospitals. I am particularly concerned by the ethnically motivated nature of these attacks against the Masalit and other communities.
Al-Fashir is home to more than 1.8 million residents and displaced people, but some 130,000 have fled their homes there, according to the United Nations, as a result of fighting in April and May. On Sunday, medical NGO Doctors Without Borders said Al-Fashir main hospital had been attacked by the RSF and put out of service. The RSF, which did not respond to a request for comment, has taken over the capital Khartoum and much of Western Sudan. The 14-month-old war has created the world's largest displacement crisis, and at the end of May, UN agencies warned of an imminent risk of famine. 18 million people were acutely hungry, they said, including 3.6 million children who were severely malnourished. No formal declaration has been made, but on Tuesday, U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan, Tom Perello, said some parts of the country were already in famine. He said the extent of the extreme hunger was unclear, but that Sudan was a case of man-made famine and that both warring parties were responsible. Vincent Makori, VOA News.
The Malawi government says Vice President Saulos Chilima, 51, will be honored with a state funeral after he was killed along with 9 other people in a plane crash. Chilima's remains were flown back to Lilongwe on Tuesday evening. The grief and anguish on the faces of Malawians was immediate as word of Chilima's death filtered across the country. President Lazarus Chakwera announced 21 days of national mourning on Tuesday when the wreckage of the small military plane carrying Chilima and a former First Lady, Shanil Zimbiri, the ex-wife of former Malawian President Bakili Muluzi, was discovered in a mountainous area in the country's north. President Chakwera says the twin-propeller aircraft went down in bad weather. For more on the Malawian Vice President's death, I'm joined live from Zomba, Malawi by Wonderful Mkuche, a Malawian political scientist. Mr. Mkuche, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now tell us, who was Saulos Klaus Chilima?
Saulos was the country's vice president from 2014 to June 10, the day he died. He joined the politics in February 2014 after working for some years in the private sector. So he rose as the managing director of Airtel Malawi, which is a multinational company here in the country. Actually, that was one of the most lucrative private sector jobs. But from there, that's when he was roped into politics as the running mate for Peter Mutharika in the May 2014 elections. So when the Democratic Progressive Party won the election, he became the vice president up until June 10 when he died.
Now, as President Chakwera addressed Malawians about the tragedy, he appeared to be choking with emotions. How was his relationship with the late Chilima?
Yeah, the two had a good working relationship. Actually, they started working together from June 2020 when Saulos Chilima became the vice president to President Lazarus Chakwera in an alliance government. So they joined the forces between the Malawi Congress Party and the UTM to form what we call a Tonse Alliance. They were working closely. On several occasions, the president was talking positively about Saulos Chilima, that he was a hard worker, he was a visionary person. So losing such kind of a person was a shock to the president.
If you can quickly kind of sum up, what was Chilima's vision for Malawi and for Africa?
In terms of his political vision during the June 2020 elections, he focused much on the youth. He came up with the idea of 1 million jobs per year in order to find employment for the youth. And in a country that suffers perennial hunger, Chilima said is going to fulfill for Malawians to have 3 meals a day. And most importantly, he was also leading the public sector reforms. So he was a person who had a clear vision politically in terms of where Malawi should be. That is why his death, most people are feeling that maybe this country is going to lack that kind of political clarity.
Right. Very sad news indeed. Wow, we feel, the pain as well. Mr. Mkuche, thank you very much for your insight into who Chilima was. Wonderful. Mkuche is a Malawian political scientist. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's shadow diplomacy in the Middle East is proving to be quite difficult. The top U.S. diplomat met Wednesday with the Qatari Prime Minister as U.S., Qatari, and Egyptian officials evaluate Hamas' response to a proposed multi-stage ceasefire in Gaza. 8 months of war has decimated Gaza, killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, and left dozens of Israeli hostages languishing in militant captivity. Hamas and the smaller Islamic Jihad militant group say they are ready to deal positively to arrive at an agreement prioritizing a complete stop to the war. A Hamas official says the Hamas response reaffirms the group's stance that any agreement must end aggression on the Palestinian people, get the Israeli forces out of Gaza, reconstruct the territory, and achieve a serious prisoner swap deal. The U.S. says it is providing additional humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians in Gaza and the surrounding region in response to dire humanitarian conditions. The aid package came just hours after Hamas accepted a United Nations ceasefire resolution. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob has more.
As the U.S. delivers new aid into Gaza, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced more than $400 million in additional humanitarian relief for Palestinians.
Let's work together to ensure that more aid gets into Gaza and, once it's in Gaza, reaches the people who need it the most.
Hamas says it wants amendments to a U.S.-backed ceasefire plan that, among other points, exchanges Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners.
They're working every minute to bring everyone home.
Hours after Blinken met in Tel Aviv with family members of hostages still held by Hamas.
They were elated at the rescue of 4 hostages just a couple of days ago, but they continue to feel deeply, powerfully, this enduring separation from their loved ones.
The UN Human Rights Office said Tuesday both sides may have committed war crimes in connection with the raid that brought the hostages home. Gaza's health ministry, which does not distinguish between civilians and combatants, says more than 200 Palestinians were killed during the rescue. Hamas held the hostages in 2 apartment buildings. The operation required support from Israeli airstrikes. Retired General Frank McKenzie, the former head of U.S. Central Command and the author of the new book, The Melting Point, tells VOA Hamas's use of human shields has complicated Israeli operations.
I think they've been a little less successful getting after senior Hamas leadership because they've chosen to hide even while their fighters fight. And I'm sure they're hidden deep underground, protected by Israeli hostages. And of course, the real hostages in Gaza, not just the Israeli hostages, but the population of Gaza itself, which Hamas has no interest in moving out of the line of fire.
Is Israel's battle against Hamas winnable?
It's winnable if they can fashion a way to a day after that makes sense. But you've got to ensure that Hamas is not part of that equation. I'm intensely sympathetic to the Israeli view that you have to eliminate Hamas. At the same time, I think it's a very high bar to say that you're going to get rid of all of Hamas because it's a revolutionary movement. If you kill 99 Hamas fighters, the 100th fighter is going to raise a bloody hand and declare the revolution.
He envisions an Arab-led force from neighboring nations to help keep the peace in the Strip once fighting is finished. And a true win for Israel and the Palestinians, he says, requires more global investment to allow Gaza to rebuild. Carla Babb, VOA News, Washington.
Student protests in the U.S. have long been a form of activism seeking to inspire change worldwide. Anti-Vietnam War protests in the 1960s inspired youth in Africa to create their own anti-war and anti-colonial movements. A student-driven protest in America against the conflict in Gaza gain attention. How will Africa's students respond? VOA's Anthony Labruto explains.
It was university students who first soured public opinion of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s. While initially limited and deeply unpopular, the protests led to increasingly violent confrontations between students and police. Africa's young leaders, who had themselves recently declared independence from European colonial empires, were taking note of the protests and discontent. As products of revolutions, many saw Vietnam as a part of the same struggle for freedom. The beginnings of the Pan-Africanism movement, alongside decolonization, saw Africa's students following their liberated governments in declaring solidarity with Vietnam. Algeria and Tanzania, most notably, saw street protests directly praising their government's anti-colonial stances in Southeast Asia.
So that was absolutely an inspiration for a lot of African youth at that period of time, in a similar way that it was an inspiration to American youth. But Vietnam, as our work has demonstrated, was in no way a kind of marginal concern or a mere footnote in post-colonial African history. It was an important site of the struggle for decolonization for a lot of young African regimes.
Now, as many U.S. students call for an end to the Israel-Hamas war, African students are encouraging their governments to once again take action.
The South Africans pull their ambassador from Israel. Chad's done the same. So those kinds of expressions of, a global South solidarity with Palestine are also reminiscent to some degree of an earlier period of history. And then at the level of protest, recently there's been an encampment at the University of Wits in South Africa.
Melchiore says the length of the Vietnam War itself contributed to the prolonged discontent. While the war against Hamas is barely a year old, the way that students are uniting may indicate a broader social movement.
In the same way that the civil rights movement was an incredibly important precursor to what came to be the anti-war movement, I think that, we have to see the BLM protests as an important precursor to these kind of pro-Palestinian protests. And I think similarly, too, there was a way in which the Vietnam War came to be connected to so many of the concerns that a increasingly politicized younger generation of Americans had.
While U.S. college campus protests have largely ceased with the conclusion of the spring semester, university leaders are bracing for a potentially tumultuous fall semester should the war continue. Anthony Labruto, VOA News, Washington.
Muslim pilgrims are gathered around the Kaaba at the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia's Mecca Tuesday as thousands arrived ahead of the start of Hajj. One pilgrim from Pakistan was overcome with joy at the opportunity to visit the Grand Mosque to perform the Hajj rituals. Hajj is the fifth pillar of Islam and begins in the 12th month of the Islamic calendar. It is mandatory for every able-bodied Muslim who can afford it to partake at least once in their lifetime. The Hajj observance begins Friday and lasts until next Wednesday. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, developing scalable engineering solutions for local challenges. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, South Korea held the first ever summit with leaders and representatives of 48 African countries. The summit sought to build better business and trade cooperation with the continent's nations and its vast mineral resources. Are Africa's ties with South Korea benefiting the continent? Join me, Vincent Makori, for an in-depth look at the South Korea-Africa Summit on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Do you feel stressed about work, school, or relationship? Well, dancing might be your best bet. It does not only relieve stress, but the physical, mental, and emotional health benefits of movements associated with dance are endless. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we will explore the incredible benefits of dance while discovering some dance techniques. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, a new report by Amnesty International is accusing Nigeria's military of inhumane treatment toward women and girls who survived being kidnapped by Boko Haram. Nigerian defense authorities, however, are rejecting the report's findings, saying that military personnel operate within the scope of international laws of conflict. Respiratory diseases are the most prevalent diseases in Kenya. Cooking with firewood is a big part of the problem, and the government data shows a growing number of Kenyans are doing it. One economist believes the increase is a result of economic shocks caused by reduced incomes during the COVID-19 pandemic and high inflation. Affordable clean cooking options are now too expensive for many people. And South Africa's third biggest political party, Umkhonto we Sizwe, led by former President Jacob Zuma, is filing legal papers seeking to stop the first sitting of parliament scheduled for Friday to elect the country's president. The party says it is boycotting the sitting and has alleged irregularities in the election. It also seeks a new election. Wars in the Middle East and Europe and the U.S. rivalry with China are likely to remain key issues to U.S. diplomats, no matter who wins the November presidential election. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara looks at the foreign policy priorities of the two candidates, Democrat Joe Biden and Republican Donald Trump.
Picture the year 2025. A permanent ceasefire in Gaza could still be out of reach. A war of attrition still simmering in Ukraine, and China continues to be a threat. Whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump wins the presidency, these challenges will remain. Biden's second-term foreign policy will be based on the same principles as his first: global leadership and multilateralism.
The United States will compete, and will compete vigorously, and lead with our values and our strength. We'll stand up for our allies and our friends.
Plus, a focus on an area the administration believes it needs to improve on.
A major initiative with the Congress aimed at truly delivering on the promise of unlocking resources for the developing world.
That means more U.S. investments for debt relief programs, multilateral development bank reforms, and various infrastructure projects worldwide. The goal, to push back on China's global development initiatives by supporting various corridor projects around the world, such as the Lobito Corridor that connects Zambia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola.
We can not only build out a transportation capacity to help ensure that we have the inputs for our clean energy supply chains, but also unlock Africa's vast agricultural potential by getting goods to market, and also unlock a digital transformation across that area.
If Trump wins, there won't be as much focus on international development.
Make America richer and safer and stronger and prouder and more beautiful than ever before. I think we have a final shot at it.
Although Trump's catchphrase is America first, it does not mean his foreign policy is isolationist.
Mercantilist, sure. Transactionalist, yes. But I think the most interesting part of his foreign policy is just the degree to which his vision of the tools of U.S. power be used in a different way.
Unwavering support for Israel, conditional aid to Ukraine, and a strong rivalry with China. These are foreign policy principles proposed for a second term by the Trump-affiliated think tank America First Policy Institute.
Those are three areas that any incoming America First administration is going to have to deal with, and it's going to have to put that peace through strength test, right? That approach to the test.
While we don't know who will win in November, we do know that foreign policy won't be the determining factor. Polls suggest most Americans are more concerned with inflation, the economy, immigration, and crime than with U.S. engagements abroad. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
The Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation, founded by the Royal Academy of Engineering, is celebrating its 10th anniversary in Nairobi, Kenya this week. The 4 finalists developing scalable engineering solutions for local challenges are being featured. Here's VOA Technology correspondent Paul Ndiho with more.
Thanks, Esther. As Africa's most influential engineering innovation prize, it has been a catalyst for change, supporting nearly 150 entrepreneurs across 23 African countries. Its impact is far-reaching, having created over 28,000 jobs and positively influenced the lives of more than 10 million people. One of this year's finalists is Rolly Asende, co-founder of La Rouge Health in Ivory Coast. His team uses artificial intelligence, or AI, and WhatsApp to develop healthcare solutions.
I have a team and a co-founder, Benjamin Sassou. So together we built a platform that I think applies a pretty standard principle, but to the unique needs of Ivory Coast and the region, right? So the technology is to connect people to care, and not just people in urban centers, but communities across Ivory Coast, and then ideally further abroad. And what we've done is, in the back end, we've built a pretty standard EMR, electronic medical records, to digitize the documentation, the billing, and the payouts. And then upfront, you have a mobile app, to access your records, to book appointments. But the unique aspect is that we've introduced generative AI, and we put it inside WhatsApp. We understood very quickly that WhatsApp is a very frequent means of communication. People sell, socialize, whatever on WhatsApp. And also WhatsApp it uses low data, low memory, and it's accessible for low literate populations, which is a really key thing here. And so with generative AI, you're able to allow people to ask questions about their health using text, voice notes, and even send a photo of acne. And so that's really made it very accessible for communities in Ivory Coast. And they're not getting diagnosed, they're getting advice and referrals. So you might ask it, hey, I have it's my first time being pregnant. How do what do I do next? And then the generative AI, which we trained with medical doctors, will give you guidance, but also prompt you to book an appointment with the appropriate professional.
I talk to a lot of people who have come up with all sorts of things creatively, and this is the first time that I've had somebody using generative AI to reach masses, because a lot of people look at AI as a tool that can take away jobs. Here, you've created a platform that literally uses AI to basically change, to help people manage their health, take care of themselves using some of these tools.
I agree with you. And I think the next thing that is also quite interesting is that we get a lot of voice notes through WhatsApp from communities. We've hit a little over 150,000 people who have interacted with our AI through WhatsApp. And so it shows really that it's a perfect channel to reach the masses, and you don't have to spend a lot of marketing budget because it's shared within WhatsApp groups, because it's either a link or a phone number. And we get a lot of voice notes, and a lot of them are not in French or English. You have Twi from Ghana. You have, I guess, the different languages of Bambara, Jula, and then local languages in Ivory Coast like Bete and Baoulé. And so that obviously is not something that we can now interpret into French, but we're building a large data set of local languages so that we can then train. And so we can actually reach a larger group of people. And then to your point, we're not necessarily doing anything other than just making healthcare information and services accessible, which is key to populations across Ivory Coast and beyond.
You are one of the nominees for this year's Africa Prize for the best innovation out there. What does this mean to you? If you won this prize, what would that mean for you?
It would just be an honor to represent, past winners, because the program has been very good to us in many ways, and so we want to do them proud, I suppose, in the final competition, and if we're successful, to be a good representation of the Africa Prize, especially in Francophone countries. I believe not many founders from Francophone countries apply. Several have been successful, also from Ivory Coast, but not many apply. So that's probably the most important thing for me, just to make sure that we justify why we were selected, and that everyone is proud of what we've done and achieved through the program. But beyond the final, I believe that there's a huge amount of value from the network that they provide. There's investors, there's experts, there's follow-on grant opportunities, and so we want to continue to tap into that. And we've already been benefiting from that. So this is kind of like maybe a way of giving back by showing them how far we've come through the program and shedding some light on the program as well.
All the best to you and your team, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated, and hope to talk soon.
Laurie Asende is the co-founder of La Rouge Health in Ivory Coast. That's today's Tech Report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Another beautiful tech report there. Join Paul Njiho each Wednesday for another tech segment right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.